The backlash against NFTs is well underway, and in at least one case, employees are the ones pushing back against their employer, whose plans for capitalizing on NFTs didn't set so well. We'll tell you all about it in today's episode of For Immediate Release. Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators.
And welcome to episode number 230 of For Immediate Release. This is Neville Hobson.
And this is Shel Holtz. We are talking NFTs today, again, an element of Web3 that has grown considerably in importance. More and more companies are starting to dip their toes into the NFT waters, and not all employees are happy about it.
It's about Salesforce, the software giant, who announced last week a foray into the NFT market, where they are going to explore a series of initiatives, including an NFT cloud, so-called, which has caused consternation amongst many of their employees. And lots of media reports. First I saw it was in Thomson Reuters, with the story saying that hundreds of workers have revolted against this news, raising environmental and fraud concerns. So they've made the announcement. They told employees. Over 400 have signed up to an open letter that was penned after the company's announcement and is being shared on internal messaging channels, which of course has leaked to many of the media reporting on this story. It's addressed to Salesforce's co-CEOs, raises concerns about those environmental and economic impacts I mentioned of NFTs, calling them unregulated, highly speculative financial assets. It's quite a big deal, clearly. Some employees expressed shock in internal chats that the plans were announced just as Salesforce debuted a major advertisement at the Super Bowl, featuring actor Matthew McConaughey and touting a commitment to sustainability. And the interesting about that, Shel, is I saw in Fast Company had a piece about that with the actual script McConaughey quoted out in the ad, where he said, while the others look to the metaverse and Mars, let's stay here and restore ours, referring to the world. Quite ironic in retrospect that he said that. So that's part of the backdrop. There's lots of opinion and speculation around all of this, that many of these employees have voiced support for the plan. So it adds an element to the lack of unanimity in opinion about all of this. They've got quotes galore everywhere. One from Alex de Vries, an economist tracking blockchain's environmental impact, who says there's a risk for any organization considering NFTs. Research he did was cited in the employee letter. He says there are ways to build NFTs responsibly, such as avoiding energy-intensive blockchains and instead using so-called proof-of-stake blockchains that consume a fraction of the energy. And that really kind of comes down, I think, to the nub of the major concern about this, which is that issue of environmental consideration, particularly given the values that Salesforce makes so prominent on their website and elsewhere, which is noted in the employee letter, enumerating how the NFT market might undercut each one of Salesforce's 5 stated core values on trust, customer success, innovation, equality, and sustainability. There's a huge section on their website in every global place they do business, the websites of those countries, talking about these values. We implore you to reconsider, the employee letter continues, noting that the employee blowback could result in increased attrition. I guess that means obliquely people will quit and they may have trouble hiring other employees. Interestingly, Reuters in their report quoted a Salesforce spokesperson saying the company planned on holding a listening session, quote unquote, with employees this week to inform its future plans, but didn't comment on the specific critiques against the NFT proposal as to whether they'd be discussing that. There's no further news on that. But that's the backdrop to it all, Shel. Big announcement, NFTs, blockchain, big company announcing it, employee revolt, noting, though, that not every employee is revolting. Many support it. So there's an interesting situation, if you will, in the company where unhappiness, people saying, goes against the core values of the company. And that's where things currently stand as far as we can tell.
This would have been a tremendous opportunity for an organization to involve its employees in the decision-making process. Now, I understand that Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, is an NFT enthusiast. He's also, I think, the owner of Time Magazine, if not one of the owners. And Time has announced that they're going to be making NFTs available. But I think you could have anticipated some employee backlash from this based on a lot of the conversation that's happening right now around NFTs. There's this 2-hour documentary on YouTube by a Canadian documentarist named Dan Olson that is pretty critical of the whole NFT space, calling it something that fools get involved in. And it's had 5 million views. So there's a lot of people now who are looking at this and calling into question the wisdom of this whole mechanism of NFTs and the whole market for it. So you could have guessed that there'd be some employee, at least doubts about this, if not outright anger, and to involve them in the decision and in the process let them know exactly what it is you have in mind might have been wise, because for all we know, the Salesforce plan is not focused on this whole NFT art space, which is just one use of NFTs. It's the one that's been getting the most attention. It's the one that has produced the greatest opportunity for fraud. But it's not the sole potential application for NFTs. Maybe they're looking down the road to other applications, and if employees had known that, they'd be a lot more sanguine about it, as they would be if they knew that they were looking at a blockchain that used proof of stake or proof of bid or proof of selection or any of the alternative proofs to proof of work, which is the one that has this tremendous impact on the consumption of energy.
Yeah, it seems to me there's so many huge assumptions being made if the reports are any indicator of that. And bearing in mind, of course, we don't know the exact details of exactly what Salesforce communicated internally about this, nor indeed the overall wording of this employee letter. So it seems to me, to your point, I think you're right that there's something missing here in the communication. That maybe Salesforce made some assumptions themselves and misinterpreted employee reaction. Maybe we've got a kind of a hardcore group of employees who are anti this, and they're the ones who are really drumming it up. That's probable. Possible, maybe not probable. So, like you said, if they could have avoided this as they planned it, we think. But I'm thinking, too, that you've actually summarized it quite well. I think there is so much disinformation and misinformation, both, about this elements of Web3, particularly NFTs, that you're right, it's focused on the artworks market principally. The scope of fraud and scams and just bad stuff generally is huge. You hear stories almost daily of scams erupting. And yet I also pay attention to some of the good examples we're hearing about increasingly, although they're a bit overwhelmed by the noise about the bad things. So, for instance, we talked about this in either the last or the previous one for immediate release about a car maker, Alfa Romeo in Italy, who is doing NFTs with the car that give you access to all sorts of proof of ownership and proof of warranty related to the car, and indeed the maintenance record of it all, so prove that it's been well cared for. So there's good things, and there are more good things, and maybe there's lots of good things in this that no one's clear about communicating. And this business about carbon usage is a genuine one. I mean, you hear stories about, to mint an NFT requires the equivalent of like 500 computers running constantly and using up God knows how much energy to do it. But there are blockchains that are particularly focused on low energy use. So is that something they're involved in? They could have explained that. There's a lot of explaining, it seems to me, that could have been done. Maybe it was. We don't know this yet, though. That may have brought out more supporters than critics. We don't know that, though, but that's possible, right?
It's altogether possible. These are the very earliest days of the whole Web3 movement. Web3 is based primarily on the idea of having a transaction layer that allows, this is what's missing from Web 1 and Web 2, we still need the middlemen of banks and the like. And the issuing of tokens is at the heart of all of this. And of course, an NFT is a non-fungible token. It doesn't have to have value. It doesn't have to be something that you buy with the hope that someone's going to want to pay more for it later. I could send you an NFT today that's just a thank you for recording this episode that has no value. We anticipate that it will never grow in value, but it's still unique and it's still yours. I mean, there's so much that we could do with this. We've talked about the house that was sold as an NFT. We've talked about tickets to events being sold as NFTs. This is a nascent space where we have to wait to see how it develops. And for all we know, Salesforce's plan is to enter this space in order to explore where it's all going and where there are legitimate uses so that they are positioned to capitalize on that when it all takes off. Yeah. But this needs to be explained to employees. And it could well be that employees heard about this through the grapevine, through some external reporting, and got all up in arms without knowing what the details are. And, that leads to employees digging in their heels as the company tries to explain it, which once again brings us back to being transparent with employees, trusting your employees, letting them know what you're up to. I don't see that they would have lost much of a competitive edge at this point if they had disclosed it themselves rather than let employees find out through third-party channels. This probably could have been avoided with better internal communication.
Yeah, I suspect you're right based on what we know. So they've got some work to do there, and maybe that's in the planning right now for them to address this better. But the reality is that this is just another example of, I think, reactions to a development in the technology space principally that is incomplete, that does not explain with sufficient clarity what's going on and what it's all about, uses too many tech-focused words and jargon that focus on a very narrow audience for a general wide audience. People don't understand this. And naturally, we are now, with so many more people connected online, everyone's got an opinion and they're sharing it. And that gets added to the communication mess. And you have then a kerfuffle with a capital K erupting, which is what we're seeing here in an organization. We will see more of this, I'm pretty sure. We've seen little bits of this in other companies. Salesforce is a pretty big one. That's why I guess they're getting a lot of attention on this. So I don't see this suddenly resolving itself. There is a bubble out there. Generally, NFTs is really smack in that bubble. And it's every day there's something that adds to the question marks in people's mind as opposed to gives them clarity as to what's going on. So, welcome to Web3, folks.
Yeah, in its earliest days.
Yeah, exactly.
There are a lot of smart people working on this. They have a lot of smart people at Salesforce. And
sure they do.
Get added to the mix of the talent and the brain power that's being applied to the development of this. Who knows? It could be a really good thing, but employees need to know that.
They do. So stay tuned. We'll have more news. If we do, we'll tell you.
Yep, and that will be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.